The farmhouse shuddered with every explosion, and each tremor shook loose a new fall of dust. It drifted down in slow sheets from the rafters and settled on Peter Hoffman's shoulders and hair, turning the wool of his greatcoat a dull gray. He was hunched over a wound, working by a weak pool of light, sprinkling the last of his sulfa powder into torn flesh. His fingertips felt almost like wood, not numb, not tingling, but emptied out, as if the nerves had resigned and gone silent. In the corner, 2 German wounded men and an American prisoner slid in and out of consciousness from cold and blood loss. Their breaths hung as thin fog in the darkness. The 4th man, a Belgian civilian with his leg ripped open by a stray fragment, could not stop the sound that came from him, a low, broken whimper that had nothing human left in it. It rose, collapsed, and rose again. The light itself seemed unstable. Each detonation outside made the lamp flicker. Shadows jumped over faces and hands, and for a heartbeat at a time, Peter lost the exact edge of the wound he was trying to close. He worked in those stutters, lean in, find the margin, feel with his fingers. Then the house shivered, and the picture blurred. 4 bodies, 4 different clocks, counting down in different rhythms. The Belgian's breath ran shallow and fast. One German's pulse was a thread that kept trying to slip away. The American prisoner's lips had gone a bluish gray. Peter's own time was measured in how many times he could still curl his fingers before they stopped responding. The iron stove was nearly finished. What burned inside it came from broken furniture. What remained now was the last of anything that would catch. Outside, wind and snow carried scattered gunfire and the close roar of engines so near it made his skin tighten. The hand on his watch had just slid past 11 p.m., December 24th, 1944. In his coat pocket, a hand-sewn linen pouch pressed against his ribs like a small stone. Inside were a few sprigs of dried mistletoe from the Black Forest. His mother had pressed it into his hands before he left home. "It will bring peace," she had said then, eyes fixed on the knot as she pulled the cord tight. "Remember what you are, Peter." Now in this rotting farmhouse on the Belgian border, that pouch of dead green was his only tangible link to a normal world, to rules that were supposed to stand above weather and artillery. His Red Cross armband was filthy, but still visible. He had convinced himself that the 2 symbols, Red Cross and mistletoe, added up to a statement beyond language, a code any civilized man ought to recognize. I am a medic. I am here to help. Tonight is Christmas Eve. The Belgian's whimper broke into a convulsion. Peter threw himself over him, using his body weight to keep the man from tearing open a wound Peter had only barely closed. The skin under Peter's hands was terrifyingly cold. Frost killed faster than bullets, the manual said. He was watching it happen with his own palms. He needed more bandages, more fuel, more painkiller, or at least 1 extra shot of morphine. He had nothing left. His pack held empty tins, blood-soaked refuse dressings, and a few instruments he could not replace. He did the inventory anyway, because the mind clings to lists when fear begins to float. Gauze, gone. Morphine, gone. Sulfa, down to dust. The stove, down to embers. He tried to calculate the world outside by sound, the way he had learned to read a front line from nothing but wind and echoes. Engines close, then receding. Gunfire shifting a few degrees like a weather front. If he left now, he might reach the tree line before the next sweep. If he waited, the storm might erase his tracks, but the cold would erase his patience first. He stared at the Belgian's shaking jaw and wondered which killed more efficiently, the whimper that drew attention or the silence that meant a body had already surrendered. Despair poured into his stomach like icy lead. He could leave. While he still had strength, while the fighting outside seemed to have moved south for the moment, no one would ever know a medic had chosen to pull out of this lonely house. The convention did not apply to a frozen corpse. His hand closed again around the little pouch. Rough linen rasped against his palm. Stay. The decision was not heroic. It was stubborn, almost obstinate. As long as he remained here and did his duty, those symbols, Red Cross, mistletoe, Christmas Eve, still meant something. He fed the stove the last 2 chunks of wood. The flames jumped briefly, lighting his pale face, young but carved through with fatigue. He chose to believe in the power of symbols because he had nothing else left to believe in. The blow came half an hour later, not shelling, wood splitting under a violent kick, the door bursting inward, followed by sharp, authoritative commands in English. Peter sprang up, both hands raised, and shouted as clearly as he could, "Sanitator! Rote Kreuz!" At the same time, he yanked the linen pouch from his pocket and held it up beside his raised hand, hoping the dark sprigs would be seen. The men who surged in were not rifle infantry. They wore U.S. winter field gear with clear medical markings, moving fast and professionally. 2 kept weapons trained on door and windows. 3 more spread out at once, eyes sweeping the room in the corner like searchlights. No one cared what Peter had shouted. The muzzle of an M1 carbine held steady on his chest. The man behind it had a flat, cold stare and crooked a finger. They did not rush the wounded first. They built a small world inside the farmhouse before they touched anything. Angles of fire, lines of sight, a clear path between door and corner, a place to set down kits without stepping on limbs. A lamp was hung higher. Another was tilted so the light fell straight down on skin and blood instead of sideways through smoke. One voice gave an order, and another voice repeated it back, shorter, stripped of decoration, as if pinning it in place. Even their pauses were purposeful, the controlled stillness of men who had done this before and could not afford improvisation. Peter stepped forward slowly, making every movement deliberate. He kept showing his armband and the hand holding the pouch. Near the doorway, a U.S. soldier, young enough to look out of place in the snow, motioned with his weapon for Peter to turn and face the wall, arms up, palms against rough brick. Another soldier moved in and began a thorough search. The process was mechanical and efficient. Padding limbs and torso, stripping away his empty medical satchel and canteen, unbuttoning his coat. The searcher's hand found the pouch clenched in Peter's right fist. "What's this?" the soldier asked in stiff German, heavy with accent. "Frieden, Christmas, peace," Peter said, forcing the words out, refusing to let go. The soldier pried his fingers open and took the pouch. He stepped into a brighter patch near the door, back to Peter, loosened the cord, and poured the contents into his palm. The dried mistletoe looked like nothing under the glare of snowlight. He prodded it, inspected it, crushed a leaf, and smelled it. The whole check took less than 10 seconds. Then he turned and tossed the empty pouch and the brittle sprigs toward the corner, where Peter had piled bloodied waist bandages and wrappers. The mistletoe disappeared into filth. "Clear," the soldier said in English, and turned away. Peter remained facing the wall, hands spread as if the brick were the only thing holding him upright. The search was not cruel, not angry. It treated him as a container that might hide something, nothing more. His armband had been seen and mentally shelved like a meaningless label. The pouch had been reduced to a quick test and a discard. He felt, with a clarity that stung, that he had been converted from medic to risk, then to cleared, a status change completed with the same speed as tying a knot. He was ordered to keep facing the wall. Behind him, a fast, precise stream of English reports snapped into place. A steady voice, Captain Hardwick, Peter would learn later, took control at once. Red tag, 2 on the left, yellow tag in the corner. Green tag, hold for now. Check all vitals. Hypothermia first. Hanson, call the evac point. We need 2 litters, priority A, farmhouse location. Boots moved quickly. A kit popped open. Cloth was cut. A radio hissed with static and short code exchanges. A complete high-speed system unfolded behind him, one he did not belong to. His Red Cross armband and the mistletoe pouch thrown into the garbage were outside its logic. He tried to turn his head toward the corner, but the guard pressed a gun barrel lightly into his shoulder blade and pushed him back into place. The coldness was not the metal. It was the procedural indifference. He held the position for what felt like endless time, forced to assemble the scene from sound alone. Clipped orders, instruments clacking, suppressed groans as bodies were shifted, broken radio updates. Captain Hardwick's voice stayed at the center, the point everything else rotated around. Pulse weak, systolic under 90, mark red, hypothermia management, start an IV. This one, femoral bleed controlled, but core temp too low. Yellow, reassess second pass. Civilian grain, basic dressings, and heat retention. As Peter listened, he began to hear the structure behind the speech. A number, then a color, then an action, then a second voice confirming it back in simpler terms so hands could move without debate. The words were not persuasion and not explanation. They were handles. Even the pauses had meaning. A half second to check a pulse, a full second to listen to lungs, a sharp again to force a recheck. The language existed to turn uncertainty into motion and motion into a report that could travel outward over the radio without carrying doubt. Every decision was fast and clean, without hesitation. It was a language Peter did not know, not based on nationality or rank, not based on his own desperate effort, but on a cold, quantified algorithm of priority. He was finally allowed to turn around, but only to stand in a specified corner under guard. Now he could see. The farmhouse had been transformed. American medical gear lay spread out. Portable lamps cast long, wavering shadows. Each casualty had 1 or 2 U.S. medics working over him, movements standardized like an assembly line. Checking a pulse was not a quick touch at the wrist. It was simultaneous attention to carotid pupils, breathing pattern. Wounds were exposed systematically, evaluated, irrigated, and cleaned with their own antiseptics and dressings, then rewrapped with uniform technique. Peter watched them redo the Belgian's ruined leg. Their stitching was built for speed rather than beauty, but the closure looked firm. No one asked who had treated the man before, or how. The tags did more than label. They granted permission. Red meant hands could be pulled off other tasks without apology and thrown here. Yellow meant time could be spent, but only after the red ones stopped leaking life. Green meant the body would be made safe enough to wait. The colors were not compassion or judgment. They were scheduling, the assignment of minutes and attention in a room where minutes were currency. Peter's armband, which had once felt like a shield, did not fit anywhere in that calculus. It was not a color, not a number, not a task. It could not open a lane in the flow of work. Captain Hardwick was a tall man with glasses. The lenses caught the lamplight, hiding his eyes. He moved between casualties, sometimes dropping to a knee to check a tag card clipped to a collar, sometimes flipping it up and scanning it like paperwork. He went to the radio operator, lifted the handset, and spoke evenly. "Aid station, this is Rover. We have 4 casualties, mixed nationalities. 2 red require emergency surgery. 1 yellow needs frost management. 1 green, over." He paused listening, then added, "Also have one enemy medic on site, disarmed, over." When Peter heard the phrase enemy medic, his heart tightened. Not German medic, not surrendering medic, not even we found a medic. Enemy medic, a neutral tactical parameter. It had nothing to do with his armband or his mistletoe or the hours he had spent wrestling himself into staying. His first attempt at communication came when a U.S. medic started working on one of the German wounded. It was the young man Peter had spent the most time stabilizing, a belly full of shrapnel. Peter had burned hours preventing intestines from spilling out. Now the American cut through Peter's layered wrappings and improvised splints. Peter could not stop himself. He shifted forward half a step and spoke in quick German. "Careful, the bowels barely held. Intra-abdominal pressure." The guard snapped his weapon up at once. The U.S. medic looked up. He had tired but focused blue eyes. He said nothing. He gave the smallest nod. Whether it meant "I heard you" or "back off," Peter could not tell. Then he continued, stripping away everything Peter had used, exposing the wound fully, flushing it with cold saline Peter had run out of hours ago, reassessing and applying a new set of sealed dressings and a sturdier splint. It was efficient, without commentary, without praise or criticism. Peter watched hours of his work get replaced in minutes, as if someone were wiping a painting clean without ever looking at it. The stove finally died. The last light inside it was a dull ember. Cold began to seep back into the room. Peter noticed the linen pouch at the edge of the garbage pile, a corner of it showing. It was smeared with someone's blood and black ash. It lay among cut, filthy bandages, empty bottles, and stained gauze, not a symbol of peace anymore, just a forgotten, useless relic. His second attempt aimed for a brief gap in Hardwick's motion. The captain had just coordinated the litter team's arrival time and stood at the door using snowlight to check a map or notes. Peter inhaled and pushed out the clearest English he could assemble. "Sir, medic, I help. Christmas night. Peace." He lifted his hand and pointed toward the corner trash pile, toward where the mistletoe had vanished. Hardwick turned. His gaze moved over Peter, pausing for a single second. There was no hatred in it, no anger, not even much curiosity, only the residue of intense focus, an assessment the way one measures resources. Then he spoke, still quick and even. "Soldier, watch him." It was not for Peter, it was to the guard. And then, immediately, the yellow-tagged casualty broke into a choking cough as if secretions had blocked the airway. Hardwick dropped Peter from his mind and charged toward the coughing man, calling, "Suction, prep for intubation." Hardwick's world shrank to that airway. Peter's raised hand sank slowly. His pointing gesture drew no eyes. His words, Christmas, peace, dissolved in the cold, busy air like breath. Over the radio came the message that the litter team was close. The Americans moved faster, tightening dressings, rechecking straps, confirming tags, packing gear. Peter curled against the wall, feeling as cold inside as he was outside. His earlier goal, being recognized as neutral as a humanitarian, now seemed naive. This system ran on a complete internal logic. It accepted casualties regardless of nationality, output triage, and evacuation priorities, used whatever resources were on hand. But it did not accept symbols. It did not decode intent. Effort that lived outside its standards was not a virtue. It was a deviation to be corrected. Despair was no longer hot. It was a bone-deep cold. He was only a parameter to be watched until evacuation finished, then handed off to the next stage, the POW collection point. The system ran, and he was silently excluded from the loop. When the radio announced the litter team was 5 minutes out, the farmhouse shifted into a final packing phase. Casualties were wrapped tighter in blankets and insulation, tags checked again, boxes latched. Peter leaned against the wall and stared through it all. The system was about to complete its cycle, and he, the extra parameter, would soon be transferred onward. Cold and exhaustion had thinned, even humiliation, into something pale. A rushing U.S. medic kicked the corner trash pile by accident. Dirty bandages rolled aside, and the linen pouch was fully exposed, its cord loosened, half the dried mistletoe spilled out and smeared with mud and blood. Peter saw it without any change in his face. It did not even trigger feeling anymore. It simply proved that something in him had died. The disruption came without warning. The U.S. casualty with the severe open fracture, marked red, had been half unconscious the whole time, bleeding controlled by a tourniquet and pressure dressing over a femoral branch. As a medic and 2 littermen prepared to move him, the casualty jerked hard in an unconscious convulsion, his whole leg snapping outward. The tourniquet, tight at the groin, had shifted slightly through repeated handling and checks. Under that sudden force, it slipped free. At first, a dark rush poured out. Then, driven by the heart's pump, bright arterial blood erupted like a released pressure line, hissing out and spraying the litterman's face, splattering the dirt floor, pooling fast. The young litterman yelped and tried to clamp his hands over it, but the blood shot through his fingers with violent force. Sound changed. The room went thinner and sharper, as if all warmth had been sucked out of the air. Blood on dirt made a wet, quick rhythm that did not match any heartbeat. The lamplight seemed too bright and too narrow, showing only hands and red and the pale thigh, while the rest of the farmhouse blurred into useless background. Someone said, "Now," twice in 2 different voices, the second time louder, as if volume could buy seconds. Peter felt the same compression in his own chest that he had felt under artillery, the sense that the next few breaths decided everything. Hansen lunged in, trying to find the source and reapply pressure. The wound was deep. Shredded muscle and jagged bone made it brutally hard to locate the severed vessel end. He pressed and searched, frantic, while blood kept coming, soaking his hands and front. The casualty's blood pressure collapsed in real time. His face drained toward ash. "Arterial spray! I can't find the source. I need help!" Hansen shouted, voice pitched high with panic. The farmhouse's rhythm shattered. The orderly wrap-up froze. Everyone's eyes snapped to that corner. Captain Hardwick moved like an animal. He shoved Hansen aside and drove his own hand deep into the wound, forcing his palm down with body weight. The spray weakened, but blood still welled between his fingers, uncontrolled. "Deep tear! Could be a profunda branch. I can't see it," Hardwick barked. His glasses were speckled with blood. His voice stayed steady, but his words came fast. "Need a deep ligation now. Hansen, your hands are shaking." "You can't. I need another set of hands. Someone who can do deep vessel ligation." His eyes swept the room. Hansen trembled. Another medic was pinned to a different casualty. The littermen were infantry pressed into carrying work, no surgical skill. Seconds ran out, each one a measure of life draining away. Hardwick's upper arm was locked hard with effort. He knew bare-handed compression would not hold, and it could not be evacuated like this. The casualty would die in minutes of hemorrhagic shock. Then Hardwick's gaze cut through the chaos and locked on the young figure in a German coat under guard. Enemy medic, Hardwick had heard the report. He had also seen, in a quick earlier glance, that the Germans' technique had been crude in supplies but not absurd in method. More important, in this moment the system had a functional gap, a missing module, immediate and specific. Stop the bleeding. When standard parts failed, any available part that fit the interface would be called. Survival efficiency overrode everything. Hardwick lifted his head and stared straight into Peter Hoffman's eyes. He shouted in German, harsh and purely technical. "Medic!" Peter flinched as if shocked awake. "Arterial ligation," Hardwick roared, his hand never easing pressure. "Can you do it?" The question punched through every barrier around Peter. No nationality, no armband, no glance toward the mistletoe. Only a skill, verifiable and binary. Can you or can you not? In these seconds, it was the only question with value. Peter did not have time for moral debate or for pride. Years of training, and something deeper, the reflex to stop death when it surged toward him, took over. He shouted back with everything he had. "Yes! Come here," Hardwick snapped. "Be my hands. Do what I say." The guard hesitated, then stepped aside under Hardwick's hard look. Peter sprang forward and dropped to his knees in spreading blood. For an instant, his peripheral vision caught the corner trash pile, the linen pouch, the scattered mistletoe lying silent in filth. It had nothing to do with what was happening now. Symbolism had left the stage. Function had arrived, blunt and bloody. As he moved, Peter felt himself switch tracks the way a hand shifts from one tool to another. The fear did not vanish, it narrowed. The room's noise became irrelevant except for the words that mattered. Hardwick's shouted phrases were not conversation. They were coordinates. Deeper. Hold. Left. Now. Peter's body answered them before his thoughts could comment, because commentary was a luxury and this was a task with one acceptable outcome. Hardwick wasted no words. "Under my fingers, deep. Do you feel the pulse? There, right there. Forceps, fine-toothed, blunt, dissect around it, expose the vessel, watch the accompanying vein. You see it?" Peter plunged his hands into warm, slick blood and felt Hardwick's knuckles like stone. Following them down through torn muscle, he found it, the faint, stubborn throb. Someone shoved instruments toward him. The metal was ice cold, shocking his fingers awake. The world collapsed to the wound, to that one living tube that had to be controlled. He was Medic Peter Hoffman. In that instant, that was all his identity needed to be. His movements came from muscle memory and a mind narrowed to a point. Vision was poor, but touch sharpened into precision. Hardwick's hand held pressure like an unmovable landmark, giving Peter a single coordinate. Peter slid the forceps in, separating torn fibers carefully, avoiding further damage. He could feel the difference between tissue that resisted and tissue that tore too easily. Blood kept trying to lift his fingertips away. It still seeped, but it no longer geysered. He found the severed end. It fluttered with each weak heartbeat like a dangerous red worm. "Ligature," Hardwick said, breathing hard, still all command. Peter took a length of catgut soaked in disinfectant. His hands were steady, steadier than he would have believed possible. There was only the vessel and the structures to spare. He threw the first tie on the proximal end and cinched it down. The bleeding stopped almost instantly. Then the distal end, the second tie held. He cut the ends and eased the forceps away. Deep in the wound, there was only damaged tissue and a slow ooze of venous blood. The lethal, rhythmic fountain was gone. Hardwick did not release pressure immediately. He waited a few seconds, feeling for the hammer of pulsation beneath his hand. Then he eased up with deliberate slowness, watching the depth for a surge. Nothing returned. Only then did he yank his stiff, cramping hand free, dragging a sheet of dark blood with it. He exhaled from deep in his chest, a long breath that fogged white in the cold air. He packed the wound with gauze and snapped to Hansen, pressure dressing. Tight, he still read, evac now. Only after that did Hardwick look up and, for the first time, really look at Peter, kneeling nearby, hands smeared with blood and grime. There was no gratitude in his face, no warmth of comradeship. Only confirmation after a rapid technical assessment. Hardwick pulled off his blood-spotted glasses, wiped his brow with the inside of his wrist, and said in clear, brief German, "Good technique, medic." The words carried no heat, no extension. They landed like an objective rating of a tool's performance. Then Hardwick turned back to the littermen and resumed his command voice. "Red first. Move, yellow next. Keep them warm." He did not look at Peter again. Peter stayed kneeling in the blood, hands lifted in front of his chest, unsure whether to lower them or keep them raised. Good technique echoed in his head, and it brought no comfort. It brought a deeper cold. It was not praise, it was data. A line item in a mental checklist. The borrowed hands performed to spec. Peter understood that if he had failed, the only difference would have been a sharper order, a faster replacement attempt, and the same end point for him once the last casualty left the room. His usefulness had opened a door for seconds and then closed again. When the moment ended, the guard's presence regained its full weight. He had been recognized, but only for a technical action he had executed successfully. His identity, his belief, his hours of stubborn staying, the mistletoe from the Black Forest, all of it had nothing to do with that recognition. He had been called as a functional unit capable of deep arterial ligation, then evaluated on performance. That was all. The guard stepped in again and motioned him back to the wall. Peter rose on unsteady legs and returned to his corner under watch. He watched the man he had just helped save get strapped down and lifted out into wind and snow and engine roar. Then the yellow-tagged casualty went, then the green, including the Belgian civilian. The farmhouse emptied with astonishing speed. What remained was blood on dirt, torn wrappers, discarded dressings, churned footprints, and a few American soldiers packing gear. The work did not end with the bodies leaving. It ended with the room being reset. Straps were coiled, lids latched, loose gauze swept into bags. Lamps were tilted away from the floor, then shut down one by one until the light returned to whatever the storm allowed through the doorway. The space felt smaller with each click, as if the system that had expanded inside it was folding itself back into portable form. When the last box was lifted, the farmhouse looked less like a clinic and more like a ruin again, emptied not by mercy, but by completion. Cold and silence reclaimed the room. The stove's ember was a weak, dying red. One U.S. soldier did a last sweep, nudging the corner trash pile with his boot, as if checking for anything important left behind. His toe caught the linen pouch, and along with the remaining brittle sprigs inside, kicked it toward the stove. The pouch slid into ash and meltwater mud, and blackened instantly, pressed flat against the floor until it no longer looked like fabric or anything meaningful. The soldier glanced at it, unconcerned, and turned away, shouldering his pack as he left. Captain Hardwick was the last to go. He scanned the empty room in one quick pass. Peter, the mess, the black smear by the stove, his face held no expression beyond fatigue and the tight readiness to move on to the next task. He nodded once to the guard and said in English, "Bring 'em. Truck's at the crossroads." Then he pulled his collar up and stepped into the snow. Peter was shoved outside. It was the early hours of Christmas morning. The sky was a deep iron gray, heavy with snow. The wind had eased slightly, but the cold was knife-sharp. At the crossroads, a military truck idled under a canvas cover. Other U.S. soldiers had already climbed in. Peter was marched to the tailgate and forced up. Inside the bed were several huddled figures, German prisoners, faces blank. Peter found a corner and sat. The truck lurched into motion, bouncing hard. The canvas slapped and sighed with each gust, turning the world outside into brief, thin glimpses. Breath condensed and fell back as damp on wool. Someone coughed in the dark, a dry sound that never quite finished. The smells collected because there was nowhere for them to go. Sweat, wet cloth, old blood, the sour edge of fear. Peter kept his hands tucked close, fingers still remembering the pressure of forceps and the slick warmth of a wound. He could not tell whether the steadiness in them was exhaustion or the last remnant of training refusing to release him. Through a slit in the flapping canvas, Peter took one last look at the farmhouse, retreating into the trees. The windows were black. Where the stove had been, he thought he saw the faintest red glow, but it might have been imagination. That farmhouse had swallowed his last sulfa powder, his strength, his idealism, and the little pouch of dried mistletoe from the Black Forest. What it spat out were casualties processed and evacuated by standard tags, and one captured enemy medic named Peter Hoffman, rated as technically good. The truck bed stank of sweat, blood, and hopelessness. Peter leaned back and felt no heroic redemption, no fierce anger, no vivid shame. A cold, almost transparent clarity seeped into him like the air outside. He had believed certain symbols, the Red Cross, the mistletoe, Christmas Eve, carried power on their own, that they could cross enemy lines and call a shared human boundary into existence. He had been wrong. The system that entered the farmhouse did not read those symbols. It read blood pressure, respiration rate, wound type. It responded to explicit technical orders and resource needs. Individual goodwill had to be translated into a signal the system could recognize, a verifiable skill, before it would be accepted even briefly and returned as an acknowledgement as practical and cold as a measurement. In that farmhouse, he had offered meaning and received a checklist. He had offered a holiday and received a timetable. Compassion, he understood now, was not a feeling that could be carried in a pocket like mistletoe. In this kind of war, it needed a new grammar, one that could survive contact with procedures and urgency. If you wanted to help, you had to speak in actions the machine could parse, in steps that could be repeated, in results that could be measured in bleeding stopped and breaths returning. Only then could the door open, and only then for as long as the skill remained necessary. The war did not change because of that night. The blizzard still raged. The Ardennes fighting would go on. His own fate would slide forward along the prisoner's path into the unknown. But something inside him had changed permanently. The naive humanitarian frame he had built from rural traditions and the literal promises of the Geneva Convention had been thrown aside, like the mistletoe itself, left in blood and mud with its shine gone. He did not deny the value of helping, but he understood now, painfully, that inside the vast machine of steel, procedures, and efficiency, the only path that could preserve even a trace of human influence was not symbolism. It was a skill that could be called on at any moment and had to be precise. It was a bitter recognition and the beginning of a harsh, practical survival of the spirit. The truck rattled onward over cratered roads, carrying Peter and his new understanding into the iron-gray dawn of Christmas Day, 1944.